After the first rehearsal of his Fifth Symphony, Gustav Mahler wrote to his new wife Alma, "Heavens, what is the public to make of this chaos in which new worlds are forever being engendered, only to crumble into ruin the next moment? What are they to say to this primeval music, this foaming, roaring, raging sea of sound, to these dancing stars, to these breathtaking, iridescent, and flashing breakers?" Mahler was entering a totally new phase in his composition, and like anybody going through a transition, he had some struggles. For one thing, this new music was wild. The Fifth Symphony swerves from violent to ecstatic to beautiful to triumphant at a pace that can give even a modern listener musical whiplash. Totally worth it, by the way, just don't say I didn't warn you. But it's tough to bring that kind of art into the world, and even tougher if, like Mahler, you were a famous Jewish artist in a city as openly anti-Semitic as Vienna was. On top of that, Mahler was still working through the nuts and bolts of voicing this new style. His first attempt at orchestrating the Fifth Symphony was a disaster, which is just to say that he put so many percussionists on stage that you couldn't hear anything else. Even at the first performance, he wasn't satisfied. He kept revising the orchestration for years afterwards. And we can't talk about the Fifth Symphony without talking about Alma Schindler. Alma was beautiful, talented, ambitious, and almost 20 years younger than Mahler. She studied piano and composition, and she moved through Vienna's most elite artistic circles. Before Mahler, she dated the composer Alexander Zemlinsky and the artist Gustav Klimt. Mahler began the Fifth Symphony during their insanely fast courtship and engagement, just 3 months from their first meeting to their wedding in 1902. Most famously, Mahler wrote the gorgeous Adagietto in the Fifth Symphony as a declaration of love to Alma during their first summer together as newlyweds. But before you feel too warm and fuzzy about that, keep in mind that when he proposed, he told her that she would need to give up composing and devote herself entirely to him. He writes, "You must surrender yourself to me unconditionally. Make every detail of your future life completely dependent on my needs, and in return, you must wish for nothing except my love." What an offer! But like many 22-year-olds, she wasn't making great life choices, so she said yes. As you can imagine, it was not the happiest marriage. On the day before her wedding, Alma wrote in her diary, "He thinks nothing of my art and much of his own, and I think nothing of his art and much of my own. That's how it is." But aside from being the inspiration for the Adagietto, marrying Alma may have been one part of a larger shift in Mahler's life that brought about this new compositional style. The Fifth Symphony is the first of Mahler's symphonies that has no connection to vocal music, and the first symphony where he didn't provide a program or an image or a story. He was determined that the Fifth Symphony would be pure music, no stories, no words, just abstract music. Now, this was probably a genuine artistic instinct, but probably also a result of the fact that he was now sitting at the cool kids table. He was the director of the Vienna Court Opera, which was a high-profile job. Alma introduced him to a new circle of very important people, and he wanted to be taken seriously as a composer. But it's Mahler, and Mahler almost compulsively weaves fragments of life into his music. So even his attempt at abstract music is far from it. He can't even resist giving the first movement a title, Trauermarsch, or Funeral March. The opening trumpet theme would have sounded to his listeners like a military fanfare, just like it does to us. The first movement has a little shout out to Wagner's opera Das Rheingold, which anybody who was anybody in Vienna would have recognized, and which Mahler himself conducted many times. And as in so many of Mahler's works, there's a ton of influence from klezmer and traditional Jewish songs. So while this is pure music compared to his previous symphonies, it's hardly abstract. It ends on an almost manically triumphant note, which for some people sounds like a triumph over tragedy, light to darkness, just like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But then there are people who find it unconvincing. In the previous movements, Mahler goes so far out on a musical limb that this victorious ending can feel like the easy way out. Or, as the musicologist Theodor Adorno called it, an extorted reconciliation. Or, as Alma Schindler-Mahler called it, boring. You'll have to listen and decide for yourself.